This video is sponsored by Marvel Strike Force, a fast-paced superhero mobile game now available on Android and iOS. I have a standing agreement with my players. If they don't use Counterspell on me, I won't use it on them. And why exactly is that? Because Counterspell is one of the absolute worst game mechanics in D&D 5th edition, and I truly hope they obliterate it in the next edition, 1D&D. And yes, it is a new edition. Don't let them fool you. In fact, we dislike Counterspell so much that my team and I created alternative spell dueling rules that takes the place of Counterspell. This spell dueling rule set is available now in the November issue of Lair magazine, Warfare and Wizardry. But that's neither here nor now. Let's talk about why Counterspell sucks so badly. Number one, it makes combat more boring. Come on. Cool spells being flung across the battlefield, heroes against villains and villains against heroes are the thing that amazing fantasy battles are made of. Not only does spellcasting have that cool factor, but it makes combat way more interesting, fun, engaging, and dynamic. Think about it. If we remove spellcasting and magical abilities from the game, what do we have in D&D? Heroes and villains going toe-to-toe and swinging swords and axes at each other, or archers firing arrows into the fray. And since Core 5th edition gives us few special tactics that you can use in melee or ranged weapon combat besides, push and grapple, most combats of this nature really just turn into a contest of hit point depletion. Roll dice, do damage, and see who runs out of health first. You see, spells and magic make things far more interesting. Sure, many spells just do damage, but so many of them don't. In fact, as players mature and gain experience, they often find that the very best spells in the game don't do damage at all, but instead shift action economy, such as Hypnotic Pattern, split the battlefield, like Wall of Force, or turn the enemy against each other, such as Dominate Person, or Dominate Monster. I know how to speak. These sorts of effects are way more interesting than just rolling dice and doing damage. And that's what Counterspell does to the game. It removes this fantastical element of wizardry and divine magic that makes combats more fun and dynamic. Now, if Counterspell had more to do with two spellcasters locking themselves into a contest of magical might to see who came out as the victor, kind of like how our spell dueling rules do, it'd be much more cinematic and genre appropriate. But it doesn't do that. Instead, it's just cast Counterspell and boop, the other spell just ceases to go off. Sure, sometimes you might need to make a spell casting check, but let's be honest, the DC is pathetically low and casters almost never fail it. Well, that's just great. I'm sorry, but enemies can cast Counterspell too, and you know it.
Sucks to be a wizard.
Hey, Mr. Wizard, here, play this instead. And what exactly is this? It's Marvel Strike Force, a free-to-play mobile game that pits a squad of your favorite superheroes against the duplicitous villains. This does look quite interesting. Yeah, I play Marvel Strike Force all the time when I'm waiting for the other players to take their turns in combat. Indeed. Now, can I replace Wolverine with, say, the Scarlet Witch? Absolutely. You can easily customize your squad of superheroes to create the perfect combination to defeat the Ultimus and his cronies. But keep in mind that certain characters have synergies with each other. So while Wolverine is at his peak with the Weapon X team, Scarlet Witch reaches her full potential with the Darkhold team. Oh, this is fabulous. Now when I'm being counterspelled and completely shut down in D&D, I could just play Marvel Strike Force on my phone. Oh yeah, and there are different game modes you can play too. There's the campaign mode, which is my favorite, and then you have blitzes, Alliance Wars, Alliance Raids, Cosmic Crucible, and more. Wonderful. And you said that it's free to play. Yeah, I haven't spent a single copper piece on it yet. What are you two doing over there? Nothing. Playing Marvel Strike Force, of course. I'm beating your team in Arena right now.
Holy crap, you're both screwed!
Number 2, it prevents the players and the dungeon master from playing the game. The worst mechanics in D&D, or any RPG for that matter, are those that prevent you from playing the game. I mean, imagine that. For instance, a spell like Banishment takes a player completely out of the game. They don't even get a saving throw at the end of each of their turns. It's not save or suck, it's save or say goodbye to the next hour or so of game time. Counterspell does the exact same thing. If a player's wizard was going to cast Fireball, because pound for pound, it's arguably the best spell in the game. That's a topic for another video, I suppose. But the enemy wizard counterspells it. That wizard does nothing that round. Oh, he can move about and he can pout, but not much else. And then if it happens again on the next round of combat, and the next, the wizard player finds himself essentially doing nothing in the combat. I mean, besides stealing a tiny bit of action economy and spell slots from the enemy wizard, which is rather meaningless because enemy spellcasters usually don't even have to worry about running out of spell slots, do they? I mean, they live for like, what, maybe 3 rounds or something anyway, so enemy spellcasters can just go hog wild. Spell slots are not a concern. And what, you're taking away their reaction? That's not that big of a deal as far as action economy goes, so that wizard is getting counterspelled and is mostly worthless and doing nothing in that combat. And I'm sure the player feels great about that too. Of course, you can reverse this whole scenario and have it be the player's wizard that is counterspelling the enemy wizard. And we basically get the same thing. The enemy wizard is neutralized and can essentially do nothing in the combat, and the Dungeon Master doesn't get to use their cool spellcaster that they were looking forward to. Of course, the Dungeon Master usually has other bad guys he runs in the combat, unless they committed the second classic blunder in D&D, deploying an enemy spellcaster without giving them minions. The first classic blunder, in case you were wondering, is giving your players too many magic items at low level. But don't feel bad if you did that, because most DMs have done that at least once. So anyway, the Dungeon Master isn't totally screwed because they do have some other monsters they can play in that combat. Player getting counterspelled is pretty much screwed. But this, of course, can lead into an arms race. Not only do we get into shenanigans like counterspelling counterspells, but Dungeon Masters can easily bring in more than one spellcaster into a fight, ensuring that at least one of them can get their spells off. I mean, if the adventurers have a reputation for counterspelling, what intelligent big bad wouldn't plan accordingly? Of course, then players start thinking how they can get around counterspell too, so they start building sorcerers that have subtle spells so their spells can't be countered. And then the Dungeon Master might think to themselves, gee, that's great. Maybe all my spellcasters should be sorcerers with subtle spell too. So, you see how we get into this arms race that escalates and escalates and escalates, all because our beloved game designers decided to throw counterspell into the game. Thanks, guys. However, I must say that the idea of 2 spellcasters going toe-to-toe, throwing their magical might against each other, trying to determine who is the stronger magic user, is, in fact, a really cool idea. That's perhaps what they were going for with Counterspell. But our spell dueling system that I've been using in my games for quite some time now captures this feeling far better. It allows you to pit one spellcaster against another in a contest of magical might, and it brings back the idea of magical opposition schools from previous editions, which they seem to have discarded in 5th edition for some reason, allowing you to gain bonuses to your attempts to counter the spell being cast. Number 3, it unfairly targets the Dungeon Master. Let's consider the typical D&D adventure that contains, say, 5 different encounters, many of which are likely to become combats. Of those 5 encounters, not every one will include enemy spellcasters, maybe only 1 or 2 will. I mean, that's just how adventures are usually designed, and it makes sense. There are fewer spellcasters in most D&D worlds than there are combatants that use weapons. So what we find is that in at least 3 of those encounters, the players are able to cast their spells as desired, do cool things, and all that jazz. And that's beautiful. I mean, I want my players to have fun casting awesome spells. Then we get to the encounters with enemy spellcasters, and I'll be honest with you, I get excited to use cool magical effects with my bad guys just as much as players enjoy casting their spells. It's my turn to actively participate in that fantastical and magical part of the game. However, when I find my bad guy casters simply getting shut down with counterspell by the player's casters, I can't help but feel I'm missing out on a really cool, fun part of the game. Now yes, I am the Dungeon Master, and I can do things to overcome this. For instance, the aforementioned arms race. But it's still disappointing that a core game mechanic encourages me, or even forces me, to do so. Of course, I'm sure there would be many players who would scream that I'm nerfing their character abilities by doing so too. And they're not completely wrong, but I would argue that they're overlooking the fact that Counterspell is just simply a bad game mechanic. It should never have been added to the game as is. Quite possibly the worst game mechanic we have in 5th edition. Now, if you want to check out our spell dueling rules, they are available now in the November issue of Lair magazine, Warfare and Wizardry, at the link below, or you can watch some more cool videos like these 2 right here, or you can go try out Marvel's Strike Force because it is really fun.